Sarah Martinez had always been the kind of woman who believed in keeping promises. At 32, she had built her life around reliability, showing up when others needed her, never letting anyone down. Her dark hair was always neatly pulled back, her clothes modest but clean, and her smile genuine even when times were tough. She worked 2 jobs to support her elderly mother and younger brother, never complaining about the weight on her shoulders. The morning of October 15th started like any other autumn day in the small town of Millbrook. Sarah woke at 5:30, made coffee in the tiny kitchen of their rented duplex, and prepared breakfast for her family. Her mother, Elena, sat at the kitchen table in her wheelchair, her hands shaking slightly from Parkinson's disease. Her brother Miguel, 19 and full of dreams about college, rushed through his morning routine before catching the bus to his part-time job at the local grocery store. "Don't forget about the appointment today," Elena reminded Sarah as she helped her mother with her medication. "The doctor said 2 o'clock sharp." Sarah nodded, checking her phone for the time. She had arranged her work schedule carefully, asking her supervisor at the diner for a longer lunch break. It meant less money that day, but her mother's health came first. The appointment was for new medication that could help with Elena's tremors, something they had been waiting months to try. By 7 o'clock, Sarah was at Murphy's Diner, tying her apron around her waist and preparing for the breakfast rush. The diner was a local institution, with red vinyl booths and a counter that had seen better days. She had been working there for 3 years, long enough to know every regular customer's order by heart. There was Mr. Thompson, who always ordered 2 eggs over easy with wheat toast. Mrs. Baker preferred her coffee black with a blueberry muffin. Young couples came in on weekends, families with children during school holidays. The morning passed quickly with the usual hustle of serving coffee, taking orders, and clearing tables. Sarah's feet ached in her worn sneakers, but she kept smiling, knowing that good service meant better tips. Every dollar mattered when you were supporting a family on minimum wage and trying to save for medical expenses. Around noon, dark clouds began gathering outside the diner's windows. The weather forecast had mentioned possible rain, but Sarah hoped it would hold off until evening. She had planned to walk to her mother's doctor appointment since their old car had broken down last week, and they couldn't afford the repair until next month. "Looks like rain," commented Frank, the diner's cook, as he flipped burgers on the grill. "Better grab an umbrella if you're walking anywhere today." Sarah checked her watch. 1:15. She needed to leave soon to make it to the medical center on time. The walk would take about 20 minutes, maybe 25 if she hurried. She untied her apron, grabbed her jacket, and told her supervisor she would be back by 4 o'clock. "Take your time," said Mrs. Murphy, the diner owner. "Family comes first." Sarah stepped outside and felt the first drops of rain on her face. The medical center was across town, past the old courthouse and through the residential area where larger houses sat behind well-maintained lawns. It was a part of town she rarely visited, where people drove nice cars and didn't worry about choosing between groceries and utility bills. As she walked, the rain began falling harder. Sarah pulled her thin jacket closer, wishing she had remembered to grab an umbrella from home. The appointment was too important to reschedule again. Her mother had already waited 3 months for this consultation, and the doctor had a busy schedule. Missing today meant waiting another month or more. The rain turned from a drizzle to a steady downpour. Sarah's hair began sticking to her face, and her jacket offered little protection against the cold October wind. She passed other pedestrians who hurried under awnings or ducked into shops to wait out the storm. But Sarah kept walking, her mind focused on getting to the medical center on time. By the time she reached downtown, she was soaked through. Her shoes squelched with each step, and she could feel water dripping from her hair down her back. People in cars looked at her strangely as they passed, probably wondering why anyone would be walking in such weather. Sarah kept her head down and continued forward. The medical center was a modern building with glass doors and a spacious lobby. Sarah paused outside, suddenly aware of how she must look. Her clothes were dripping wet, her hair was a mess, and she probably looked like she had been swimming fully clothed. She didn't want to embarrass her mother by showing up looking like this, but there was no time to dry off or change clothes. She pushed through the glass doors and approached the reception desk. The woman behind the counter looked up with barely concealed surprise at Sarah's appearance. Other people in the waiting area glanced over, some with sympathy, others with curiosity or mild disapproval. "I'm here for Elena Martinez's appointment," Sarah said, trying to sound confident despite feeling like a drowned cat. 2 o'clock with Dr. Henderson. The receptionist checked her computer screen. "Yes, I see the appointment. Please have a seat, and we'll call you when the doctor is ready." Sarah found 2 chairs in a corner of the waiting room, hoping to minimize the attention her wet clothes were attracting. She used tissues from her purse to wipe water from her face and tried to smooth down her hair. Through the large windows, she could see the rain continuing to fall steadily. 20 minutes later, her mother arrived in a medical transport van, the kind used for patients in wheelchairs. Elena's eyes widened when she saw her daughter's condition. "Mija, you're soaked. Why didn't you call for a taxi?" "It's okay, Mama," Sarah whispered. "The rain started after I left. Don't worry about it." But Elena was already reaching into her purse, pulling out the small amount of cash she kept for emergencies. "Here, take this for a taxi home. You'll catch pneumonia walking back in this weather." Sarah gently pushed her mother's hand away. "Keep that money. We might need it for the prescription." "I'll be fine." The nurse called Elena's name, and they moved into the examination room. Dr. Henderson was a kind man in his 50s who had been treating Elena for 2 years. He noticed Sarah's wet clothes but didn't comment, focusing instead on his patient. The appointment went well. The new medication showed promise for reducing Elena's tremors, and Dr. Henderson was optimistic about the potential improvements. However, the prescription was expensive, and insurance would only cover part of the cost. Sarah did quick mental calculations, wondering if they could afford both the medication and groceries for the rest of the month. After the appointment, Elena was loaded back into the medical transport van. Sarah stood outside the medical center, watching the van disappear around the corner. The rain had not let up at all. If anything, it seemed to be falling harder now, driven by gusty winds that made umbrellas useless. She looked at her phone to check the time. 3:45. If she hurried, she could make it back to the diner by 4:15, only a little late for her evening shift. Mrs. Murphy would understand, but Sarah hated being unreliable. She took a deep breath, pulled her inadequate jacket tighter, and began the walk back across town. The return journey was even more difficult than the trip to the medical center. The rain was now coming down in sheets, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Sarah's clothes, which had barely begun to dry during the appointment, were immediately soaked again. Her shoes were completely waterlogged, making each step uncomfortable and cold. As she walked through the nicer part of town, she passed houses with warm lights glowing in the windows. She could see families inside, dry and comfortable, probably having afternoon snacks or helping children with homework. The contrast with her own situation made her feel more alone than usual, but she pushed those thoughts aside. Self-pity wouldn't get her home any faster or make the rain stop. Halfway back to the diner, Sarah realized she was shivering uncontrollably. The October wind cut through her wet clothes like ice, and she was starting to feel genuinely cold in a way that worried her. She paused under a bus stop shelter, hoping to warm up slightly before continuing. But the metal structure offered little protection from the wind-driven rain, and she was probably warmer moving than standing still. She resumed walking, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. Her shift at the diner would last until 9 o'clock, meaning she wouldn't get home until almost 10. Miguel would be worried if she was too late, and her mother would blame herself for the expensive appointment and the rain. Sarah made a mental note to call them both as soon as she reached the diner, just to let them know she was safe. The streets seemed longer than usual, stretched out by the miserable weather and her discomfort. Cars splashed through puddles, sending waves of dirty water onto the sidewalks. Most drivers were focused on their own safety and visibility, but a few slowed down when they saw her walking, probably wondering if she needed help. Sarah kept her eyes forward and continued walking, too proud to accept charity from strangers. As she approached the downtown area again, the rain seemed to intensify even more. Sarah's hair was plastered to her head, and she could feel water running down inside her jacket and soaking through her shirt. Her jeans were heavy with absorbed water, and her sneakers made squishing sounds with each step. She probably looked like someone who had fallen into a lake, but there was nothing to be done about it now. The diner was still 6 blocks away when Sarah realized she was approaching the old military memorial in the town square. It was a simple monument, a statue of a soldier surrounded by plaques honoring local veterans from various wars. During nice weather, people sometimes sat on the benches around the memorial to eat lunch or read. Today, the area was completely deserted. Sarah paused at the edge of the square, using the moment to catch her breath and check the time on her phone. 4:10. She was going to be late, but not by much. Mrs. Murphy would understand, especially when she explained about her mother's appointment. Sarah looked up at the soldier statue, water streaming down its bronze face like tears, and felt a moment of connection with the figure's stoic expression. That was when she noticed the black sedan parked near the memorial, its engine running and windshield wipers moving steadily back and forth. At first, she thought it was just someone waiting out the worst of the storm, but then, she saw movement inside the car. Someone was watching her, though she couldn't make out any details through the rain-streaked windows. Sarah felt a moment of unease. Was someone following her? Had she done something wrong? She tried to think of any reason why someone would be sitting in a car watching her walk through the rain, but nothing came to mind. Maybe it was just her imagination, brought on by exhaustion and discomfort. She decided to continue walking and see if the car followed her. She made it another block before glancing back. The black sedan was moving slowly behind her, maintaining a distance of about half a block. Sarah's heart began beating faster. She wasn't usually the type to worry about strangers, but something about the situation felt wrong. A car following a woman walking alone in the rain could mean any number of bad things. Sarah quickened her pace, turning down a side street that would still lead her to the diner but by a more indirect route. If the car was really following her, this would confirm it. She looked back after turning the corner and saw the sedan making the same turn. Now she was genuinely worried. The side street was less busy than the main road, with fewer people around and more shadows between the streetlights. Sarah realized she had made a mistake by leaving the main road. If someone intended to harm her, this quieter street would give them more opportunity and fewer witnesses. She began looking for businesses that might be open, places where she could duck inside and ask for help if necessary. But, as she walked faster, fighting against the wind and rain, the black sedan continued to follow at the same careful distance. Whoever was driving seemed content to simply watch her struggle through the storm, making no attempt to approach or call out to her. The behavior was strange enough to keep Sarah on edge, but not threatening enough to justify running or screaming for help. 3 more blocks to the diner. Sarah decided to stick to her route and get to safety as quickly as possible. If the car followed her all the way there, she would ask Mrs. Murphy to call the police. The diner always had customers and staff around during the dinner hours, so she would be safe once she reached it. The rain showed no signs of letting up, and Sarah was now so wet that additional water hardly mattered. Her fingers were numb with cold, and she was starting to feel lightheaded from the combination of exhaustion, worry, and exposure to the elements. The warm, bright lights of Murphy's diner had never looked so welcoming as they did through the sheets of rain ahead. She was almost there when something unexpected happened that would change everything about this miserable day. Sarah was just 1 block from Murphy's diner when the black sedan suddenly accelerated past her and pulled into a parking space directly in front of the restaurant. Her heart raced as she watched the driver's door open, but instead of the threatening figure she had been imagining, an elderly man in a military dress uniform stepped out into the rain. He was tall and distinguished, probably in his 70s, with silver hair and a bearing that spoke of decades of military service. Despite the downpour, he stood straight and walked with purpose toward the diner's entrance. Sarah slowed her pace, confused by what she was seeing. Had this man really been following her, or was it just a coincidence? As she approached the diner, the elderly man stopped and turned around. When he saw her walking toward him, soaked to the skin and shivering, something remarkable happened. He came to attention with perfect military posture, raised his hand to his forehead, and gave her a crisp, formal salute. Sarah stopped walking, completely bewildered. Water dripped from her hair as she stared at this distinguished stranger who was saluting her in the rain outside a small-town diner. She looked around to see if there was someone else he might be saluting, but the street was empty except for the two of them. "Ma'am," the man said in a clear, strong voice that carried easily over the sound of the rain. "General Robert Harrison, United States Army, retired. Would you permit me to have a word with you?" Sarah's mouth opened, but no words came out. A retired general wanted to talk to her? She was a waitress at a diner, walking home soaked from the rain after taking her mother to a doctor's appointment. What could a general possibly want with her? I don't understand," she finally managed to say. "Were you following me?" General Harrison lowered his salute but maintained his formal posture. "I was, and I apologize for any concern that may have caused you. My reasons will become clear if you'll allow me to explain. Might we step inside where it's dry?" Sarah glanced toward the diner's warm, bright windows. Her shift was supposed to start in 10 minutes, and she was already late. Mrs. Murphy would be expecting her, and the dinner rush would begin soon. But her curiosity about this strange encounter was stronger than her worry about being late for work. "I have to work," she said. "I'm already late for my shift." "I understand completely," General Harrison replied. "Perhaps I could speak with your employer and explain the situation? I assure you, this is a matter of considerable importance." Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself nodding. There was something about the general's manner that inspired trust, despite the unusual circumstances. She pushed open the diner's door, and General Harrison followed her inside. The sudden warmth hit Sarah like a wall, making her realize just how cold she had become. Water dripped from her clothes onto the tile floor, and she was acutely aware of how she must look compared to the impeccably dressed military officer beside her. Mrs. Murphy looked up from behind the counter, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. "Sarah, honey, you're soaked through. And who's your friend?" "Mrs. Murphy," Sarah began, not sure how to explain the situation. "This is General Harrison. He wanted to speak with me about something." General Harrison stepped forward and extended his hand to Mrs. Murphy. "Ma'am, I'm Robert Harrison. I apologize for arriving unannounced, but I have an important matter to discuss with Miss Martinez. Might we use a booth for a few minutes? I'm happy to compensate for any inconvenience to your business." Mrs. Murphy shook his hand, clearly impressed by his military bearing and courteous manner. "Of course, General. Sarah, take booth number 7 in the back. It's quieter there. And, for heaven's sake, get yourself a towel and some hot coffee before you catch pneumonia." Sarah grabbed a clean dish towel from behind the counter and tried to dry her hair while General Harrison waited patiently. The other customers in the diner were stealing glances at them, clearly curious about the distinguished military man who had arrived during the storm. They settled into the back booth, Sarah still dripping slightly and General Harrison sitting with perfect posture despite his wet uniform. Mrs. Murphy brought over 2 cups of steaming coffee and discreetly withdrew to give them privacy. "Miss Martinez," General Harrison began, "I owe you an explanation for this unusual encounter. 3 hours ago, I received a phone call from my grandson, Miguel Martinez. He told me that his sister was walking across town in a thunderstorm to take their grandmother to a medical appointment, and that she would have to walk back in the same storm because they couldn't afford taxi fare." Sarah's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. "Miguel called you? I don't understand. How do you know my brother?" General Harrison smiled, the stern military expression softening into something warmer. "Miguel didn't tell you about his application to the Military Academy Preparatory School?" Sarah shook her head, confusion evident in her face. "He mentioned something about college applications, but he's been keeping the details to himself. He said he wanted to surprise us with good news. Your brother submitted an application 6 months ago, along with an essay about his role models and the person who had most influenced his life. Miss Martinez, he wrote 12 pages about you. About how you've worked 2 jobs to support your family since your father passed away. About how you've sacrificed your own dreams to make sure he could stay in school and your mother could receive proper medical care. About how you've never once complained or made him feel like a burden. Sarah felt tears mixing with the rainwater still on her cheeks. He wrote about me? He did more than that. His essay was so compelling that it caught the attention of the Academy's selection committee. They've accepted him for the fall semester, with a full scholarship that includes a living stipend for students from low-income families. Miguel will not only receive a world-class education at no cost to your family, but he'll also be able to send money home to help with expenses. The general paused to let this information sink in. Sarah sat in stunned silence, trying to process what she was hearing. Her little brother, who had always been smart but never seemed to apply himself, had been accepted to a prestigious military academy? When Miguel received his acceptance letter yesterday, General Harrison continued, he called the academy to ask if there was any way to expedite the living stipend payments. He explained that his sister was walking to work in dangerous weather because their car had broken down and they couldn't afford repairs. He was worried about your safety and wanted to find a way to help immediately. General Harrison reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. The academy contacted me because I'm an alumnus and I live in this area. They asked if I might be willing to meet your family and provide some immediate assistance while Miguel's paperwork is processed. I've been driving around town for 2 hours, looking for a young woman matching Miguel's description of his sister. Sarah stared at the envelope he placed on the table between them. What is that? It's a check for $5,000, drawn on the Academy's Emergency Assistance Fund. It's intended to help your family with immediate expenses like car repairs, medical bills, and living costs until Miguel's stipend begins. Consider it an investment in one of the most promising young men we've encountered in years. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for the envelope, but then she pulled back. I can't accept this. We're not charity cases. We take care of ourselves. General Harrison leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but kind. Miss Martinez, with respect, you've been taking care of everyone but yourself. Miguel told us that you dropped out of community college to work full-time when your mother's condition worsened. He told us that you've never bought yourself new clothes or gone out with friends because every dollar goes to family expenses. He told us that you walk everywhere to save gas money, even in dangerous weather. Sarah wiped her eyes with the dish towel, leaving streaks of makeup on the white cloth. Miguel talks too much. He talks about someone he loves very much, General Harrison replied gently. Someone who has sacrificed everything to give him opportunities. The Academy doesn't just educate young men and women, Miss Martinez. We try to support the families who produced such exceptional individuals. You helped create the character that impressed our selection committee. This assistance is as much for you as it is for Miguel. The general stood up and placed the envelope firmly on the table. There are no strings attached to this money, and it's not a loan. It's recognition of what you've already done and an investment in what your brother will accomplish. The Academy takes care of its own, and that includes the families of our cadets. Sarah looked at the envelope, then up at General Harrison. Why did you follow me instead of just coming to the house? Miguel gave me your work schedule and mentioned that you were taking your mother to an appointment this afternoon. When I arrived at the diner earlier, they told me you had left for the appointment. I decided to wait and see if I could spot you on your way back. When I saw a young woman walking alone in this storm, I suspected it might be you. I followed at a distance because I wanted to observe the dedication Miguel had described. I wanted to see for myself the person who would walk miles in a thunderstorm for her family. General Harrison moved toward the front of the diner, then turned back. Miss Martinez, in 30 years of military service, I've learned to recognize true courage when I see it. What I witnessed today was a young woman who put her family's needs above her own comfort and safety. That kind of character is what we try to instill in our cadets. Miguel learned it from watching you. Sarah called after him as he reached the door. General Harrison, wait. Thank you. Not just for the money, but for telling me about Miguel. I didn't know he saw me that way. The general smiled and gave her another precise military salute. Ma'am, your brother sees you exactly as you are, a hero. The Academy is honored to have him, and I'm honored to have met you." As General Harrison left the diner and disappeared into the rainy evening, Sarah sat holding the envelope with trembling hands. Mrs. Murphy approached the booth cautiously. "Everything okay, honey?" That seemed like quite a conversation. Sarah looked up, tears streaming down her face, but, for the first time in months, she was smiling. "Mrs. Murphy, my brother is going to the military academy. And he wrote an essay about me." Mrs. Murphy sat down across from her, maternal concern evident in her weathered face. "That's wonderful, Sarah. But what was all that about with the general?" Sarah opened the envelope and stared at the check inside. $5,000. More money than she had ever seen at one time. Enough to fix their car, pay for her mother's medication, and maybe even let her think about going back to school herself. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "my brother just changed our lives." Mrs. Murphy glanced at the check and gasped. "Oh my goodness, Sarah. What are you going to do?" Sarah stood up, still holding the check, and looked out the window at the rain that was finally beginning to ease. Somewhere in town, Miguel was probably finishing his shift at the grocery store, unaware that his secret application had just transformed his family's future. Her mother was at home, probably worrying about Sarah walking in the storm and feeling guilty about the expensive doctor visit. "First," Sarah said, "I'm going to call a taxi to take me home. Then, I'm going to hug my brother and tell him how proud I am of him. And, tomorrow, I'm going to start figuring out how to be a family that doesn't just survive, but actually thrives." She paused at the door, looking back at Mrs. Murphy. "Would it be okay if I took the rest of the evening off? I think this is one of those moments when family definitely comes first." Mrs. Murphy waved her away with a smile. "Go on, honey." "And, Sarah? Sometimes the rain stops right when you need it to." As Sarah stepped outside to wait for her taxi, she realized that General Harrison had been right about more than just Miguel's potential. She had been so focused on taking care of everyone else that she had forgotten to recognize her own worth. Tonight, for the first time in years, she was going home not as someone who had endured another difficult day, but as someone whose sacrifices had been seen, valued, and honored. The rain was indeed stopping, and, through the clearing clouds, Sarah could see the first stars beginning to appear. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but it would also bring new possibilities. Miguel would go to the academy, their mother would get her medication, and Sarah might finally have the chance to think about her own dreams again. Standing there in the fading storm, no longer feeling cold despite her wet clothes, Sarah understood that sometimes the most important moments in life come disguised as ordinary hardship. Today had started with a walk in the rain and ended with a salute from a general. Tomorrow would start with a family that finally had hope for the future. The taxi ride home took only 10 minutes, but it felt like the longest and shortest 10 minutes of Sarah's life. She stared out the rain-streaked window, watching familiar streets pass by while her mind raced with everything that had just happened. The check sat in her purse like a secret waiting to be shared, and she found herself rehearsing what she would say to her family. When the taxi pulled up to their small duplex, Sarah could see warm light glowing through the front windows. Miguel's bicycle was leaning against the porch, which meant he was home from work. Her mother would be in the living room, probably watching her evening television shows while worrying about Sarah walking home in the rain. Sarah paid the taxi driver with some of the tip money from her apron pocket, adding a generous extra $1 because she felt like celebrating. As she walked up the cracked concrete path to their front door, she could hear the familiar sounds of home, the television playing softly, dishes clinking in the kitchen, Miguel's voice calling something to their mother. She paused with her key in the lock, taking a moment to appreciate these sounds that had always represented comfort and family, but which tonight felt even more precious. In a few minutes, everything would be different. Not just because of the money, although that would certainly change their immediate circumstances, but because of what the money represented. Recognition. Hope. A future that extended beyond just getting through each day. Sarah opened the door and stepped inside, immediately struck by the warmth and the familiar smells of home. Miguel appeared from the kitchen, a dish towel in his hands and concern written all over his 19-year-old face. "Sarah." Thank God you're home. I've been worried sick about you walking in that storm. Mom made me call 3 times to see if you'd made it to work okay. He stopped talking and really looked at her for the first time. You're completely soaked. What happened to your umbrella? Sarah smiled at her brother, seeing him with completely new eyes. This was the young man who had written 12 pages about her sacrifices. This was the brother who had been accepted to one of the most prestigious military academies in the country. This was the person who had worried enough about her safety to contact the academy and ask for help. Miguel, she said quietly, we need to talk. Both of us. Get Mama and come sit in the living room. Something in her tone made Miguel drop the dish towel and move quickly toward their mother's room. Sarah heard him speaking in Spanish, explaining that Sarah was home safe but wanted to have a family meeting. A few moments later, Miguel was pushing their mother's wheelchair into the living room, Elena's weathered face creased with worry. Mija, you look terrible, Elena said, reaching out to touch Sarah's still damp hair. You should change into dry clothes before you catch cold. And, why are you smiling like that? Did something good happen at work? Sarah sat down on the old couch across from her mother and brother, still wearing her wet clothes but no longer feeling cold. She pulled the envelope from her purse and placed it on the coffee table between them. Something incredible happened today, she began. But, first, Miguel, I need you to tell me about the Military Academy Preparatory School. The color drained from Miguel's face, and he glanced quickly at their mother before looking back at Sarah. Who told you about that? A retired general named Robert Harrison. He said you wrote an essay about me as part of your application. He said you were accepted with a full scholarship and a living stipend. Elena gasped and grabbed Miguel's arm. You applied to military school? When? Why didn't you tell us? Miguel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, looking younger than his 19 years. I didn't want to get anyone's hopes up. The application required essays about leadership and character, and I wrote about Sarah. About how she's been the real head of our family since Papa died. About how she gave up college to take care of us. Sarah felt tears starting again, but she let him continue. I never thought I'd actually get accepted, Miguel said, his voice getting stronger. But last week I got this letter saying I was in, with full financial aid. They even said I'd receive a monthly stipend that I could use to help support my family. I was going to tell you both this weekend, after I figured out how to explain it properly. Elena was crying now, reaching for both of her children with shaking hands. Miguel, this is wonderful. Why would you keep such good news a secret? Because I was scared, Miguel admitted. Scared that if I left for school, Sarah would have to work even more to make up for my grocery store salary. Scared that you'd need medical care I couldn't help pay for. Scared that our family couldn't survive without everyone contributing. Sarah picked up the envelope from the coffee table and opened it, showing them the check inside. Miguel, yesterday you called the academy and asked about getting your stipend early because you were worried about me walking to work in bad weather. Miguel nodded, looking embarrassed. I heard you telling Mama that our car wouldn't start again, and I knew you'd walk no matter how dangerous it was. I just thought maybe if I explained our situation, they might be able to help somehow. They sent General Harrison to find me, Sarah continued. He followed me for 2 hours in the rain today, watching me walk across town for Mama's appointment and back. Then, he gave me this check for $5,000 from the Academy's Emergency Assistance Fund. Elena and Miguel stared at the check in stunned silence. Elena crossed herself and whispered a prayer in Spanish. Miguel's mouth hung open as he tried to process what his sister was telling him. $5,000? Elena whispered. For us? For us, Sarah confirmed. General Harrison said it was recognition for the kind of family that produces a young man like Miguel. He said the academy takes care of its own, and that includes the families of their cadets. Miguel stood up abruptly and began pacing around the small living room. I can't believe this is real. I've been terrified for weeks about how to tell you I was leaving for school. I kept imagining how much harder things would be for you both. And now, Sarah interrupted gently, we can fix the car. We can pay for Mama's new medication without choosing between that and groceries. We can stop living paycheck to paycheck, at least for a while. Elena wheeled her chair closer to the coffee table and stared at the check as if it might disappear if she looked away. Miguel, how did you know to write about your sister? What made you think of that for your essay? Miguel stopped pacing and looked directly at Sarah. Because she's the strongest person I know. Because every single day for the past 3 years, she's done things that most people would consider heroic without ever thinking she was doing anything special. Because when the essay prompt asked me to write about leadership and character, Sarah was the only example I could think of. He sat back down, leaning forward earnestly. Do you know what Sarah does every morning? She gets up at 5:30 and makes breakfast for all of us. Then, she works an 8-hour shift at the diner, comes home to help with Mama's physical therapy exercises, studies the bills to figure out which ones can wait another week, and then works her second job cleaning offices until almost midnight. Elena reached for Sarah's hand, squeezing it tightly. I know how hard you work, Mija. We both know. But I don't think Sarah knows, Miguel continued. I don't think she understands that most people our age are worried about what to wear to parties or which movie to see on weekends. She's been handling adult responsibilities since she was 19, and she's never once complained or made us feel like we were holding her back. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, overwhelmed by hearing herself described this way. I just did what needed to be done. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, Miguel said firmly. They wouldn't have. That's what makes you special, and that's what I tried to explain in my essay. I wrote about the time you worked a double shift with the flu because we needed the money for Mama's prescription. I wrote about how you taught yourself to do basic car repairs by watching YouTube videos so we wouldn't have to pay a mechanic. I wrote about how you've never bought yourself anything new in 3 years, but you made sure I had decent clothes for job interviews. Elena was sobbing now, but they were tears of pride mixed with sadness. Sarah, my brave girl. I've watched you sacrifice so much, and I felt so guilty about being a burden on you and Miguel. Mama, you're not a burden, Sarah said quickly. You're our mother. Taking care of you isn't a sacrifice, it's a privilege. That's exactly what you wrote in my essay about her, Miguel said to their mother. I quoted Sarah directly. I remembered her saying those exact words to you last year when you were feeling bad about your medical expenses. General Harrison's words came back to Sarah. Miguel had written 12 pages about her. 12 pages describing her daily life, her choices, her character. For the first time, she was seeing herself through her brother's eyes, and the person he described seemed almost like a stranger. A stronger, more admirable stranger than she had ever imagined herself to be. Miguel, she said quietly, when do you leave for the academy? Classes start in 6 weeks. I'll leave for orientation in 4 weeks. He paused, looking uncertain again. If I go. I mean, I know I should go, but leaving you both right when things might finally be getting better feels wrong. Sarah stood up and walked to the small bookshelf where they kept family photos. She picked up a picture of their father in his construction worker uniform, taken just a year before the accident that killed him. He looked proud and strong, the kind of man who worked hard to provide for his family and expected his children to make the most of their opportunities. Papa would want you to go, she said, showing the photo to Miguel. He always said education was the one thing nobody could ever take away from us. He would be so proud to know that his son was accepted to the military academy. Elena reached for the photograph, tracing her husband's face with one trembling finger. Your father dreamed of Miguel going to college. He used to say that his son would have opportunities he never had. This academy, it's even better than what Papa imagined. Miguel looked at the photo, then at his mother and sister. But what about you both? Even with this money from the academy, there will still be expenses. There will still be medical appointments and car repairs and all the things I've been helping with. Sarah sat back down, feeling more confident than she had in years. Miguel, with the car fixed and Mama's medication paid for, I can think about going back to school myself. Maybe start with one night class at the community college. The academy stipend you mentioned, even a small amount would help, but, more importantly, knowing that you're building a career means I don't have to carry the whole family's future on my shoulders anymore. She gestured toward the check on the coffee table. And this money isn't just for immediate expenses. It's a foundation. A chance for all of us to think beyond just surviving each day. Elena wheeled her chair between her two children and took each of their hands. When your father died, I was so afraid that our family would fall apart. I was sick, we had no savings, and you were both so young. But look at what we've built together. Look at the man Miguel has become, and the woman Sarah has become. She squeezed their hands tightly. This general, he didn't give us money because he felt sorry for us. He gave us money because he saw what your father and I saw every day. He saw a family with strength and character and love. He saw people worth investing in. Sarah looked around their small living room, taking in the mismatched furniture, the bills stacked on the side table, the medical equipment in the corner. 6 hours ago, this had felt like a place where they were barely hanging on. Tonight, it felt like a home where anything was possible. There's one more thing, she said, remembering General Harrison's final words. The general told me that what he saw today, when I was walking in the rain, was true courage. He said Miguel learned his character from watching me, but I think it's the other way around. I learned mine from having a family worth fighting for. Miguel grinned, looking more like the carefree teenager he had never really gotten to be. So we're really going to do this? I'm really going to the academy, and you're really going back to school, and we're really going to be okay? Sarah picked up the check one more time, still hardly believing it was real. We're going to do more than okay. We're going to thrive. That night, as Sarah finally changed out of her rain-soaked clothes and prepared for bed, she reflected on the strange turns life could take. This morning she had been a waitress walking to work, worried about making ends meet. Tonight she was part of a family with a future full of possibilities. She thought about General Harrison, somewhere in town, probably telling his own family about the young woman he had met who walked miles in a thunderstorm for her family. She thought about Miguel, lying awake in the next room, finally, allowing himself to dream about his career in the military. She thought about her mother, sleeping peacefully for the first time in months without worrying about how they would afford next month's medications. Most of all, Sarah thought about her father, and how proud he would be to know that his children had learned to take care of each other and themselves. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but it would also bring new opportunities. The rain had stopped, and the future was finally beginning. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the parking lot of Central Community College, holding a folder containing her class schedule and financial aid paperwork. The autumn morning was crisp and clear, nothing like that stormy October day that had changed everything for her family. She wore new jeans and a sweater that she had actually bought for herself, instead of finding at a thrift store or borrowing from a friend. The check from General Harrison had transformed their lives in ways both practical and profound. Their old car had been repaired and was running reliably for the first time in 2 years. Elena's new medication was working better than anyone had dared hope, reducing her tremors significantly and giving her more independence. Most importantly, Miguel was thriving at the Military Academy Preparatory School, sending letters home filled with enthusiasm about his studies and his future career plans. But perhaps the biggest change was in Sarah herself. For the first time since her father's death, she was making decisions based on her own dreams rather than just immediate survival. She had enrolled in 3 classes: business mathematics, English composition, and introduction to social work. Her goal was to eventually earn a degree that would let her help other families facing the kinds of challenges hers had overcome. As she walked across the campus toward her first class, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Miguel, who had developed a habit of sending encouraging messages whenever he knew she had something important happening. Remember, you taught me that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what needs to be done even when you are scared. Today you're doing what you need to do for your future. Dad would be proud. I'm proud. Go show them what a Martinez can accomplish. Sarah smiled and tucked her phone back into her purse. Miguel had grown so much in just 3 months at the academy. His letters home were filled with new confidence and big plans for his military career, but he still took time to encourage his sister and check on their mother's health. The young man who had once felt guilty about leaving his family was now their biggest cheerleader from a distance. The business mathematics classroom was in a newer building, with large windows and modern desks. Sarah chose a seat near the middle, not wanting to seem too eager by sitting in the front row, but not wanting to hide in the back either. As other students filtered in, she noticed that many of them looked much younger than her 28 years. Some were probably fresh out of high school, starting college right on schedule without any of the detours that life had forced on her. For a moment, Sarah felt self-conscious about being older than most of her classmates. What would they think about a woman her age sitting beside them in an introductory class? But then, she remembered something General Harrison had said during their brief conversation at the diner. True courage meant recognizing your own worth regardless of other people's opinions. The professor, Dr. Martinez, no relation, despite sharing the same last name, was a middle-aged woman with an encouraging smile and an obvious passion for helping students succeed. During her introduction to the class, she mentioned that she had returned to school herself as an adult after raising her children. Some of you are starting college right after high school, Dr. Martinez said, looking around the classroom. Others are returning to education after time in the workforce or raising families. Both paths are valid, and both bring different strengths to your learning experience. Life experience often makes someone a better student, not a worse one. Sarah felt some of her nervousness fade. She opened her notebook, the first new one she had bought for herself in years, and began taking notes. The material wasn't as intimidating as she had feared, and she found herself genuinely interested in learning about business principles and financial planning. These were skills that could help her manage her family's finances better, even beyond any career applications. After class, as students gathered their belongings and headed toward the door, an older woman approached Sarah's desk. She was probably in her 40s, with graying hair and the confident bearing of someone comfortable in academic settings. "Excuse me," the woman said, "I'm Dr. Patricia Williams from the Social Work Department. I couldn't help but notice that you're enrolled in Introduction to Social Work as well as business classes." That's an interesting combination. Sarah stood up, wondering if she had somehow made a mistake in her course selection. Is there a problem with taking both? I wasn't sure what I wanted to focus on, so I thought I'd try different subjects. Dr. Williams smiled warmly. No problem at all. Actually, it's a smart approach. I was impressed because students who combine business understanding with social work often become very effective advocates for underserved families. They understand both the human needs and the systems that can help address those needs. She handed Sarah a small card with her office information. Would you be interested in coming to talk with me sometime this week? I'd like to tell you about some scholarship opportunities specifically designed for students who are interested in family advocacy work. Sarah took the card, hardly believing what she was hearing. 3 months ago, she had been struggling to afford her mother's medication. Now a professor was talking to her about scholarships and career opportunities. I'd like that very much, Sarah said. Thank you for thinking of me. As Dr. Williams walked away, Sarah reflected on how much her perspective had changed. Before General Harrison's visit, she had seen herself as someone who responded to crises and survived difficult circumstances. Now she was beginning to see herself as someone who might actually help other families facing similar challenges. Her phone rang as she walked across campus toward her next class. The caller ID showed Elena Martinez, and Sarah answered immediately, always slightly worried when her mother called during the day. "Mija," Elena said, her voice bright and excited, "you'll never guess what happened this morning." Sarah smiled at the enthusiasm in her mother's voice. Elena's improved health had brought back much of her natural optimism and energy. "Tell me, Mama. What's going on?" Mrs. Rodriguez from next door came over crying because her grandson was arrested again for fighting. She didn't know what to do or where to get help. "I remembered what you said about learning to help families like ours, so I called that social services number you found last month." Elena paused dramatically, clearly enjoying her story. "I spent an hour on the phone, talking to different people and taking notes. By the end, I had found Mrs. Rodriguez 3 different programs that might help her grandson, plus information about legal aid and family counseling services. Sarah stopped walking, struck by what her mother was telling her. "Mama, you did social work. You helped someone navigate the system to find resources for her family." "Yes," Elena said proudly. "And, afterward, I realized that I know lots of families in our neighborhood who need help but don't know where to find it. I've been thinking that maybe I could learn to do this more officially. There are volunteer training programs for people who want to help connect families with services." Sarah sat down on a bench, overwhelmed by the idea of her mother finding a new sense of purpose through helping others. "Mama, that's wonderful. You would be amazing at that kind of work. I think maybe our whole family is learning that we can do more than just survive," Elena said. "We can actually make things better for other people too." After the call ended, Sarah sat on the campus bench for a few more minutes, thinking about the ripple effects of that stormy day in October. Miguel was at the academy, preparing for a military career that would let him serve his country and support his family. Elena was considering volunteer work that would help other families facing crises. And Sarah was sitting on a college campus, working toward a degree that might let her become a professional advocate for people who needed someone to fight for them. All because a retired general had recognized something valuable in a young woman walking through the rain to take care of her family. Sarah's English composition class was in an older building with high ceilings and tall windows. The professor, Mr. Johnson, was a young man probably not much older than Miguel, but he had an obvious love for literature and writing that made the class engaging from the first minute. "Your first assignment," he announced near the end of class, "is to write a personal narrative essay about a moment that changed your perspective on yourself or your future. It should be 500 to 1,000 words, and it should focus on a specific event rather than a general period of your life." Sarah smiled as she wrote down the assignment details. She knew exactly what moment she would write about, and she suspected it might be one of the easier essays she would ever write. The challenge wouldn't be finding material, it would be editing down all the details and emotions of that day into just 1,000 words. After classes ended, Sarah drove to Murphy's Diner for her part-time evening shift. She had reduced her hours there from full-time to 3 evenings a week, using the time she saved for studying and attending classes. Mrs. Murphy had been incredibly supportive of Sarah's return to school, often letting her study during slow periods and bragging to customers about her employee who was working toward a college degree. "How was your first day of classes?" Mrs. Murphy asked as Sarah tied on her apron. "Better than I expected," Sarah replied honestly. "I was nervous about being older than most of the other students, but it wasn't a problem at all. And one of the professors already wants to talk to me about scholarship opportunities." Mrs. Murphy beamed with pride. "I knew you'd do well. You've always been one of the smartest people I know, Sarah. You just needed the chance to show it in a classroom instead of just here at work." The dinner shift was busy but manageable, and Sarah found herself enjoying the work more than she had in years. Knowing that this job was now a choice rather than a desperate necessity made even difficult customers easier to handle with patience and good humor. She was still working to support her family, but she was also working toward a future that extended beyond just paying bills. Around 8 o'clock, as the dinner rush was winding down, Sarah looked up to see a familiar figure entering the diner. General Harrison, still impeccably dressed in civilian clothes but with the same distinguished bearing she remembered from their first meeting. He approached the counter where Sarah was refilling the coffee machine, and she noticed that he was smiling with what looked like satisfaction and pride. "Good evening, Miss Martinez," he said formally. "I hope you don't mind my stopping by unannounced again." Sarah grinned at him, no longer intimidated by his military bearing. "General Harrison. Of course not. It's wonderful to see you. Can I get you some coffee and a piece of pie?" "That sounds perfect," he replied, settling onto one of the counter stools. "I was hoping you might have a few minutes to talk when your shift ends. I have some news I think you'll find interesting." Mrs. Murphy appeared from the kitchen, clearly recognizing the general from his previous visit. "General, welcome back. Sarah, why don't you take your break a little early? I can handle things here for a while." Sarah poured coffee for General Harrison and cut him a generous piece of apple pie before sitting down beside him at the counter. She was curious about what news he might have, but mostly she was just happy to see him again. First, General Harrison said, "I wanted to hear how your family is doing. Miguel sends regular reports to his academy advisor, and they're quite impressive. But I'd like to hear your perspective on how things have been going." Sarah updated him on Miguel's progress, her mother's improved health, and her own return to college. General Harrison listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and nodding approvingly at each positive development. "That's exactly what I hoped to hear," he said when she finished. "Your family has taken the opportunity we provided and used it to build something even better than what we imagined. That leads me to my news." He pulled a folder from his jacket and placed it on the counter between them. The military academy has decided to establish a new scholarship program, specifically for family members of cadets who have shown exceptional character and dedication. It will provide full tuition assistance for family members pursuing degrees in fields that serve their communities. Sarah stared at the folder, hardly daring to hope what he might be suggesting. "The scholarship is being named in honor of outstanding cadet families," General Harrison continued, "and Miguel's family has been chosen as the first recipient. If you're interested, this scholarship would cover your full tuition and fees for a bachelor's degree in social work, plus a modest living stipend to help with expenses." Sarah opened the folder with trembling hands and saw official letterhead from the Military Academy Preparatory School. The scholarship amount listed would cover not just tuition, but also books, supplies, and enough living expenses to let her reduce her work hours even further. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "Why us? What did we do to deserve something like this?" General Harrison smiled and took a sip of his coffee before answering. "Miss Martinez, 3 months ago I watched a young woman walk miles through a thunderstorm to take care of her family, then walk back the same distance to get to her job on time. I watched someone who had every excuse to give up or feel sorry for herself, but who instead just kept moving forward with grace and determination." He gestured toward the scholarship paperwork. "That kind of character doesn't happen by accident. It's built through years of making the right choices even when they're difficult. Miguel learned it from watching you, your mother learned it from surviving challenges with dignity, and you learned it from having people you loved enough to fight for." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what was being offered. "General Harrison, this is life-changing. This would let me focus on school full-time and graduate in 2 years instead of 4 or 5. "That's exactly the idea," he replied. "The Academy wants to invest in families that produce people like Miguel. More importantly, we want to invest in people like you who will go on to help other families facing similar challenges." Sarah looked around the diner, thinking about all the customers she had served over the years. Some were families celebrating good news, but others were clearly struggling with money problems, health issues, or other challenges. How many of them might benefit from having someone who understood their situation and knew how to help them navigate available resources? "There's one more thing," General Harrison said, pulling a letter from the folder. "This arrived for you yesterday, sent to the Academy and forwarded through me." Sarah opened the letter and saw that it was from Miguel, written in his careful handwriting on Academy letterhead. "Dear Sarah," the letter began, "by the time you read this, General Harrison will have told you about the scholarship. I want you to know that I nominated you for this program, and I want to tell you why. 3 months ago, I was terrified to tell you about the Academy because I was afraid of being selfish. I was afraid that my dreams would make your life harder. But since I've been here, I've learned something important. The best way to honor someone who has sacrificed for you is not to make smaller dreams, but to make bigger ones. You taught me that taking care of family means giving them the tools to build their own futures, not just solving their immediate problems. Now it's my turn to help give you tools for your future. I'm proud to be your brother, and I'm proud that the Academy recognized what I've known all along: our family produces people worth investing in. Accept the scholarship, Sarah. Not because you owe it to me or to Mama, but because you owe it to yourself and to all the families you're going to help. Love and respect." Miguel. Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the folder with the scholarship paperwork. She looked up at General Harrison, who was watching her with the patient expression of someone who had seen many important moments in his long career. "General," she said finally, "I accept the scholarship. And I promise you that I'll use it to become the kind of person who helps other families find their way through difficult times." General Harrison stood up and extended his hand for a formal handshake. "Miss Martinez, the Academy is honored to have your family as part of our community. I have no doubt that you'll make us proud." As he prepared to leave, he turned back one final time. "I want you to remember something, Miss Martinez. That day in the rain, when I first saw you walking across town to take care of your mother, I didn't see someone who needed help. I saw someone who was already helping. The scholarship isn't charity. It's recognition of who you already are and an investment in who you're going to become." That night, Sarah drove home with the scholarship folder on the passenger seat beside her. The rain had stopped months ago, but she could still remember exactly how it felt to walk through that storm, worried about her family and focused only on getting through another difficult day. Tomorrow she would tell her mother and call Miguel with the news. Tomorrow she would start planning how to balance full-time school with part-time work. Tomorrow she would begin the process of becoming a professional advocate for families facing the kinds of challenges hers had overcome. Tonight, she simply drove home through the clear autumn evening, grateful for the stormy day that had taught her the difference between surviving and thriving, and for the general who had seen something worth saluting in a woman walking through the rain to take care of her family. The future was no longer something that happened to the Martinez family. It was something they were actively creating, one brave step at a time.